Frederick Perls, MD and PhD, founder of Gestalt Therapy, a great mind, a great man. That voice was silenced forever on March 14, 1970, in a year which already witnessed the passing away of Abraham Maslow and Eric Berne, other leaders in the field of the third force psychology. Frederick Perls, with a giant of the spirit, a brilliant man, a scintillating personality.
Yeah. This was after I'd written a manuscript, Ego, Hunger and the Crash, and I gave her this to read. And then she said the following sentence, which I never forget in my life. Dr. Perls, if you do not believe in the libido theory anymore, you better hand in your resignation. Now this word believe was a tremendous shock to me. If this is a scientific approach, what has this to do with believing? And my answer was, I'm not going to hand in my resignation. If you want to kick me out, fine.
He was vivid, he was exciting, he stimulated you, he made you aware of your potential and the life that flowed in your veins. Author of Ego, Hunger, and Aggression, he also had to his credit Gestalt Therapy, which he wrote in conjunction with Paul Goodman and Ralph Hefferlin. More recently, he published Gestalt Therapy Verbatim and his autobiographical notes In and Out of the Garbage Pail. Man, he was like an Old Testament prophet, a true son of the Jewish people. Oh, did he have charisma, as few people have charisma nowadays, like it's out of style. You can't expunge him from memory. You can't bury him from consciousness. He was that vital, he was that meaningful, that you can't make the proper closure. He himself, his influence. He will forever remain, wherever psychologists and friends gather, an unfinished gestalt, a configuration that remains forever with you, because he got to you and remained with you. Your life was never the same after you had met him. That is the why of this program, to pay respect and tribute to him, to Fritz Perls, human being par excellence, friend, teacher. This program is called Come to Life. My name is Herschel Lyman, and I'm a dropout rabbi who first discovered Fritz at Esalen Institute in Big Sur 4 years ago when I was dropping out. I've asked one of Fritz's closest friends and loyal disciple and leading practitioner of Gestalt therapy, Dr. James Simkin, to tell us about him and his impact in the field of modern psychology. When did you first meet Fritz, Jim?
I met Fritz in 1952. At the time I was at the VA Mental Hygiene Clinic in New York City, and my own personal crisis then was not as a dropout rabbi, but as a depressed postpartum PhD.
I guess that's an occupational hazard that other people have too.
Oh yeah. And one of my close colleagues said, there's somebody that's just come back from the West Coast who is real good and who I would recommend to you. And he was referring to Fritz. And I had been shopping for someone, something to get me out of, to rescue me. At that time, I still believed that I needed to be rescued by somebody out there.
But that's contrary to the whole Gestalt therapy, is it not? Fritz would be the first one to deny that.
He was.
I noticed that there's quite a difference then between Fritz's approach, his Gestalt approach, and the conventional approach of the psychoanalysts nowadays. I can always remember the phrase that, or the sentence that Fritz coined, and it's part of his epigrammatic brilliant wit. He said, psychoanalysis is an illness that pretends to be a cure. And of course that's a delightful thing to hear, but I don't think it's very pleasing to the conventional psychoanalysts.
And Fritz was on a vendetta, and he had never quite finished until near the very end with his disappointment with Freud and the whole school.
I think Freud really disappointed him personally one time.
Yes, and he talks about this in his In and Out the Garbage Pail.
That's a wonderful book, In and Out of the Garbage Pail, a great title. And it's more than just an autobiography. It's the man turning himself inside out and being very, very open, very revealing about his fascinating life.
Fritz in that book is quite open and quite revealing, and still Fritz, which is somewhat hidden and somewhat non-revealing.
I see. You feel that there are certain parts of himself which possibly he did not reveal, that he concealed?
He wasn't aware of. Unfortunately, Fritz's handicap was Fritz, and he didn't have the advantage of being trained as I had by a Fritz Perls.
It's the same way as Sigmund Freud. He had no one to analyze him. He had to go through the painful task of analyzing himself.
And these scotomata, the blind spots, are there, and Fritz was quite distrustful of somebody else, especially if somebody else was a woman, to confront him with his blind spots.
Yeah, I understand some of his early analysts and training analysts were women, people like Helene Deutsch and Karen Horney.
Yes.
And he does pay a certain tribute to them because they were influential in his life.
A certain tribute is a very good term for how Fritz handles women, yes.
I'm kind of fascinated by Fritz's concept of neurotic illness. He says that the neurotic person is one who is manipulating the environment as a device to gain his objective. That's what his concept of neurotic illness was. And then his definition of growth is the ability of the individual to rely more and more upon himself and less upon the environment.
I believe that there is a split among some of the Gestalt therapists as to the balance between self-support and environmental support. I doubt that the ideal is being totally and exclusively self-supportive. And if you knew Fritz, he was a very good example of the don't do as I do, do as I say school of thought. He was very manipulative and very capable of getting other people to do things for him. And I don't put this down. I think this is very necessary, that we are interdependent rather than independent. Using the capacity to manipulate as a style of life would be considered, I consider, as a neurosis.
Yes, well, he says that we create a character by the way we manipulate the environment.
Yeah.
In the same way that Reich says that we develop character by the way we configure our muscles or hold our bodies. So
Fritz was influenced quite a bit by Reich. The only analyst who had any real impact on him and whom he credits with having given him some sense of himself and interrupted his difficulties long enough to look at himself. He was very grateful to Wilhelm Reich in 1933, 1934 when he worked with him, and afterwards would give him credit.
Jim, what was the relationship between Fritz and Eric Berne? Was there a closeness between them? Because it seems to me that Fritz borrows from some of Berne's concepts of playing games.
Yeah. Fritz is perhaps the most adept borrower I've ever met. He borrows and then makes part of his own system from whoever has something to offer. And he does not agree with colleagues' definition of an eclectic. An eclectic is somebody that takes the best part of every system and promptly throws it away. Fritz, on the other hand, would take from anybody anything which was supportive to him, which would allow him to function. And he liked a lot of Eric Berne's concepts. He also enjoyed Eric Berne's not taking himself too seriously, and would have a lot of fun watching the disciples become very embroiled and serious, while Eric sat back, as Fritz often did, and say, ha ha ha, look at these idiots taking my game so seriously.
Well, one thing we can say, he had a tremendous sense of humor and a great sense of the comic and the droll, and there was never a dull moment with Fritz because he was such a vital, exciting personality. And a weekend at Esalen, where he conducted a workshop, could be a terribly memorable event that I can't forget that weekend. I remember there were about 50 of us gathered there in the old lodge at Esalen, and we had sessions Friday evening, Saturday morning, Saturday afternoon and evening, and Sunday morning. And there were about 20 people, including myself, who volunteered to go on the hot seat. And would you describe that technique or Fritz's approach? Is this so much individual therapy? Is Gestalt so much individual therapy or group therapy, or a combination of the best features of both?
Fritz wrote a paper which he calls workshop versus individual therapy, and he made the prediction that individual therapy would become and has become obsolete. What he literally does is individual therapy within a group, and he refers to this as a workshop. The style is that whoever is motivated, who feels ready to work, can sit in what he refers to as a hot seat. The hot seat is a seat usually adjacent to him and facing the audience. Fritz loved an audience and loved to have the person he was working with also face the audience. And his contact would be a good part of the time with the audience, although he had very fine ears and paid very good attention with his ears to the person that he's working with. Taking the hot seat means sitting in the empty chair and being willing to say where you are from moment to moment. The ideal is staying in the continuum of awareness.
Some people have said that Fritz was very cruel in his technique. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah.
Was there a reason for the cruelty, or did it really get to people? Did he accomplish his goals?
When you say was there a reason for his cruelty, I feel.
Well, he wasn't a sadist per se, but.
The whole why because game is something that I feel ensnared in, and don't feel that that's fruitful or leads to anything. I would say that Fritz was cruel, was aware of his cruelty, and was very willing to be cruel, to express himself. The impact of his cruelty would frequently create a frustration, a strong reaction in the person that he was working with. Now, he was not cruel in a vacuum, and he didn't simply use people to exercise his cruelty, so in that sense he certainly wasn't sadistic.
Yes, I'm glad you made that distinction, because now I understand a little better.
He did express cruelty or joy or anger or boredom. I've seen Fritz fall asleep when somebody was that boring, and he was unwilling to attend when he was not there, when he was not moved by, interested in.
Yeah, he was very real in his own emotional reactions, and he didn't conceal too much. And one thing he hated was a phony, and I think he took great pains himself not to be phony, not just not to appear phony, but not to be phony.
Fritz was phony, and
well, that's interesting. Right?
Was not. His top dog would never allow his phoniness to come out without beating on himself. So he never did accept his phoniness.
Top dog? What do you mean by that?
Oh, in the Gestalt therapy framework, there is a concept or an idea. When we're small, very young, we are forced to swallow whole. The term is introject ideas, attitudes, etc., especially something that's unpalatable. If you remember, I mentioned dental aggression.
Yeah.
By chewing and tasting and then swallowing, I make part of myself. Otherwise, I swallow whole and I'm left with an introject, a foreign body, which isn't me, it's somebody else's values or ideas, etc. And this is my top dog. My top dog is my shouldistic part.
Shouldistic, I see. What I should do or what I ought to be.
Yeah, the blame, guilt aspect of myself that I've swallowed. Not that I believe in, but that I pay lip service to, and the paying lip service to is the bottom dog function, the underdog.
Oh, in other words, this other directed type of thing, what society expects of you, you swallow that without any critical chewing or any chewing it over.
Yeah. And so what I do is develop a saboteur, an underdog, and a lot of my energy, or most of my energy, will go into top dog, underdog games, rather than doing what I really believe in, what I really feel good about.
Yeah, I noticed that in some of his work, Fritz talks about projection, introjection, and retroflexion.
Yes.
And those are, at first, they seem to be very technical concepts, but they make a lot of sense and give us a great understanding as to the way human beings function in their mental and emotional lives.
Mm-hmm.
What fascinated me about Fritz was his keenness and his awareness of an individual. He could size up a person at a glance. He had great eyes, and as you said before, he had great ears. And that brings to my mind what he says in some of his works, that some people don't have ears, and some people don't have eyes, and some people don't have legs, and some don't have a center from which to live. And there are some people, unfortunately, who have no soul. That is, they don't want to have any emotions. Could you elaborate a little bit on this concept of having holes and deficiencies?
Yeah. The W-H-O-L-E, being whole, is an ideal, and that is accepting myself as I am. I like to use an analogy, and the analogy is that of a cake. If I consider myself as a cake and think of my individual parts, my oil or grease or whatever I use to as part of the foundation, my flour, my salt, all of these ingredients, many of which by themselves are quite noxious or obnoxious. I can imagine that I would rather not be greasy or floury or whatever, and these parts are parts of me. Now, if I reject these parts, or if I've had some significant other say to me, that's terrible, or you shouldn't be that way, you shouldn't, the top dog thing, I can't appreciate my W-H-O-L-E, my whole, and I become a personality or a person with holes, H-O-L-E-S. And these holes are based on my assumption that I shouldn't have flour, I shouldn't have oil, I shouldn't have vanilla, etc., etc. So my cake is never complete, is never gestalt, and gestalt means configuration or whole. I am unfair to myself, I cheat myself when I'm not myself fully.
In other words, you have your cake, but you can't eat it under those circumstances.
And nobody else can, usually.
Nobody can stomach a person of that sort.
Yeah. I take the phraseology, nobody can stomach me, very seriously, and when I work with people,
Oh, yeah.
and they say that they can't stomach, I will ask them to be their stomach. This is part of the Gestalt approach, taking language seriously. That we are, I am, when I say I can't stomach, saying something very significant. And if I have ears, and I listen to me, and I take what I say seriously, then I have a clue. I say that I can't see that for beings. I'm saying something about my eyes. Oh, I see. I'm saying something about taking something in with my eyes. I hear you. Another phrase referring to a vital part, hearing. I'm in touch with what you're saying.
In touch, yes, that's one of the major senses, to be in touch with something. That's right, that we take these phrases and expressions for granted, but there's a basic semantic reason for these phrases and ideas.
I would say there's a basic organismic foundation rather than a semantic reason. I would quarrel with semantics.
All right. What did, I won't quarrel with you on that because I don't know enough about it, but what did Fritz mean, and I think this is one of his classic statements, he says, lose your mind and come to your senses. Just what...
Yeah. What he said was that the function of Gestalt therapy is to teach a person to lose their mind so that they could come to their senses. When I am thinking, I can't be feeling or sensing. When I'm sensing, I can't be focusing my awareness on thinking.
Oh yes, so that's part of that figure ground configuration. Only one thing can command your attention at any one given time.
I can only be interested in focusing on, in touch with, aware of something. And I like the phrase that I'm mentally unbalanced when I'm not giving enough credence to my sensing and feeling and staying with my computer, with my thinking. What Fritz meant was, you deprive ourselves a lot when we don't allow our sensory input organs to work for us, and we insist everything go through the computer first.
Because nowadays there seems to be a great emphasis upon that. There's a new book called Body Language that's becoming a bestseller. I haven't read it yet. And The Betrayal of the Body by Lowen indicate that that we have lost the use of our senses. We've become too computerized. We think that we can control things with our minds, whereas the mind of the body, or the decisions that the body makes, those decisions are much more important than the mind decisions. Because, for example, I think Fritz once cited that if a car is bearing down upon us, if we would take time to put the information into our computers, into our brains, to figure the car is going at 50 miles an hour and we're so many feet from us, by that time the car would be upon us and would destroy us utterly, whereas we just jump out of the way. We listen to our body because our body has a mind of its own. And it's good every now and then to trust the body.
Our body has a mind of its own.
I think that's a phrase that Fritz would use, and but I think his great contribution was the fact that he pointed out that we had become fragmented persons detached from the organs of our body, and that's something for us to be more and more aware of.
For some people, this may be a surprise. Fritz was an idealist and very much of a sentimentalist. I knew Fritz not only as a colleague and teacher, also as a friend. He loved sentimentality. He loved, for example, Old Lang Syne, and he would melt. He loved bringing gifts, and if somebody admired something of his, he would give this to the person. My children are very, very fond of Fritz as a human being and as a very warm, giving, grandfatherly type of person. And many people who have encountered Fritz as a therapist just haven't the vaguest notion of Fritz as this kind of person.
Yes, Fritz strikes me, notice I use the present tense, as an Old Testament prophet. It's hard to visualize him in the context of family, wife, and children. I understand he has 2 sons, is that right?
No. Fritz has a son, or had. I also use the present tense. And my wife has been pointing out to me that I still don't say Fritz in the past tense. Very difficult, Fritz, for me to think of you in the past tense, and I have not said goodbye to you. And I've attended several memorials for you, will be attending one, and I'm not sure that I really want to say goodbye to you. To come back to the here, now.
You will finish your mourning for him, but you will not say goodbye to him, and that's a fine difference.
I believe that's true. He had a son, Steve, and a daughter, Renata, and a wife, Laura. Laura is an outstanding therapist in her own right and has contributed a great deal to especially the body language theory of Gestalt therapy. Much of what I learned about body language, I learned from Laura in some of the seminars and workshops that she gave in the early 50s at the New York Institute for Gestalt Therapy.
I like Fritz's concept or conceptualizing of anxiety. He said that anxiety is the gap between the now and the then, and that ideally, if a person can center him exactly in the now, this would be a great way of coping with anxiety.
No, you misunderstand. Fritz said that it's impossible to be anxious in the now.
Oh.
That if you are centered, you cannot be anxious. That the way to guarantee anxiety is to have one foot in the now and one foot in the then. And another definition which complements this one is that anxiety is excitement minus sufficient support of oxygen.
Oh, yes.
So that if I feel excited and don't express, I impress or squeeze.
Do you think that then for therapeutic purposes, awareness of how you breathe can go a long way in dispelling anxiety?
I think that's imperative. I can't imagine anybody being in touch without being aware of their breathing.
This has a connection with William James' idea of do we run because we're afraid, or are we afraid because we run? In other words, the physiological functioning of our body, maybe that brings on the fear or the anxiety. I don't know, but that's a technical question.
It's not a technical question. It's an example of the kind of mind-fucking that Fritz would say, my God, no. That's an avoidance of what is.
What is Fritz's Gestalt in dream interpretation, in short?
The primary idea behind the acting out or playing out the various parts of the dream is a very simple concept. I am my own scriptwriter. When I dream, I'm writing my own script. So what I'm doing in writing my own script is telling me, if I'm willing to listen, to the various parts of me, telling me about me. The inanimate parts, the places, the road, the building, the stone, location, etc., by taking sides with, by being that part in the here and now. The technique is to be in the now and to work on the dream as if I'm having the dream at this moment.
Well, I can see a person reenacting the role of different individuals that he meets in his dream, but it's hard for me to visualize how a person can be an inanimate object like a tent or a house that you meet in the dream.
I am a road. I am long and winding. I start over here and I end over there. I can experience people walking on me. Oh, I experience people walking on me. Aha. As I become aware of people walking on me, I become aware of something about me that I haven't been willing to look at, to face, until I was willing to be the road in my dream and to experience being walked on. At this point, Fritz would invariably say, now be the people walking on you.
I see.
And to experience, to exploit the affect, the awareness that came with affect. And at this point would ask, okay, now be the people walking, and so on, to stay with whatever is in the foreground, especially that has affect.
Yeah, that's interesting. Remember that Fritz emphasized the concept of polarity in dreams, and that we are not all good and we are not all bad, but we are everything. We are the sum total, and more than just the sum total of everything that we dream.
Throughout all of Fritz's theory, throughout the whole theory of Gestalt therapy, the concept of polarity is central. And I use the word central advisedly. The idea of centering. To be able to experience my own center, I need to know my extremes. And to get in touch with my polarities, my extremes, to discover my centeredness, to become aware of my senses and my feelings as well as my thoughts, my computer, allows for the balance that I spoke of earlier among sensing, feeling, thinking. Whatever balance is centering for me. There is no correct center. There is my center. I don't know what the correct center is for you. I can sense, feel, be aware of what is right for me.
I've seen his famous quotation about doing your thing on a poster, and it's a very, very popular wall poster now. How does it go? You do your thing and I'll do my thing. And
there's what he calls the Gestalt therapy prayer. And in the book that you have there, which is In and Out the Garbage Pail, at the very beginning, there is the Gestalt therapy prayer. And the essence of the poem is that I don't exist in this world to meet your expectations.
oh yeah, that's it.
You don't exist in this world to meet my expectations. You do your thing, I do my thing. And if perchance we happen to meet, then that's great if our paths intertwine or cross. And if not, that's too bad. That's the essence of the poem.
I see. Did he embody that in his own life? Did he exemplify that, rather?
Frequently. Sometimes with a gentleness, sometimes with a vindictiveness. There was some of the vindictiveness of the Yahweh in him.
The Yahweh of the Old Testament.
Yeah. And
thundering prophet. That's
he
what he was.
He once shouted, I remember, in the baths to somebody very close to me, "I'll never forgive you." And he did. He forgave her.
Just like Freud had his Jung, whom he considered betrayed him. Maybe I'm putting it too strong. Did Fritz have any similar vendettas about people who he felt traduced him in some way or another?
He felt betrayed periodically and over and over again. He had a number of betrayals. All of them had enough actuality to allow him to build up the fantasy that went with it. Part of Fritz's blind spot was a paranoia concerning being taken advantage of. And of course, the other side of the coin is Fritz would never admit to himself his taking advantage of, his using, his manipulating other people. This is part of what for me was missing, and People that saw all of Fritz, there was so much to him that some of his craziness was minor compared to his genius, his greatness.
He certainly was colorful. I remember he gave a definition of marriage at that workshop I referred to, and he said that marriage is the exchange of many appointments for one disappointment. Did that characterize his attitude towards marriage, towards women?
Fritz was blatantly unfair and discriminating toward women. He was forever competing with women and felt that he could never quite compete.
Yeah, what is this business of competing with women? How come? Usually, I mean, didn't he feel competitive towards men colleagues who were in the same field?
No, he was much more forgiving and understanding of men. He usually managed to alienate anybody that got too close. I believe that I may be one of the major exceptions in his life, a person that was close and was not alienated. There was one attempt for a few months, and that didn't pan out.
You mean almost like an obligatory scene, but it wasn't really necessary because you were really very close to him.
Yeah, we liked each other genuinely. We understood each other. I think he experienced my enormous respect and love, and I believe that he was possibly the most perceptive person I've ever met.
I would agree with you just from my limited contact with him just over a weekend or 2 weekends when he conducted his workshops.
There's much about Fritz's behavior that I disapproved of. He knew this, I knew this, and we still were very able to relate. There was much of my behavior that he disapproved of, and that still didn't make any difference, significant difference in our relationship.
We mentioned Fritz's attitude towards women. He could coin expressions like Oscar Wilde. For example, one time he said, "Tears are a woman's second best weapon," and that was characteristic of him. Getting back to his philosophy of therapy, the Gestalt, Fritz was not really concerned with the why, as you mentioned, like most psychoanalysts are, but he was most concerned with the now and the how. And the now he called awareness, and the how he called behavior. Would you elaborate on this a little bit, Jim?
Yeah. Buber's I and thou, here and now is the encapsulated description of Gestalt therapy.
Yeah, he refers to Buber. When he was in the city of Frankfurt, I think they were. He said a lot of great people seemed to convene in the city of Frankfurt in Germany, and Buber was amongst them.
He was there in the middle 20s and was exposed to some of the greatest minds of the century at that time, especially the existentialists and the analysts who were active at that point, the Gestalt psychologists, Wertheimer and Kurt Goldstein, who was his idol, and several others. And that was a place where he received an enormous amount of intellectual stimulation. Fritz was very restless, and as soon as he would get into the city, he would immediately want to look at the entertainment page, and is there any opera in town? What's the movie that's playing?
He was the bon vivant in that sense.
Either was entertaining or needed to be entertained. He avoided boredom.
Yeah.
He was very, very afraid of boredom, of nothingness.
Yeah, in and out of the garbage pail indicates that, because time and time again he refers to the boredom that would sometimes come over him, even though his life was tremendously creative.
The I and thou, here and now concept or idea is that all that exists in the present. The transaction that's taking place between you and me at this moment, or the I and the thou here now, is all that there is. I may bring in a memory. You may bring in a memory. I may have an itch. You may have an itch. This is all part of the now. If I want to avoid contact with the now, and especially contact with the thou in the I-thou relationship, or contact with the I might computerize, start thinking about, and frequently the why because game, I believe always is an avoidance of an I-thou here-now contact.
Yeah, he says, Fritz once said, we ask questions of why in order to torture ourselves, not really to get any answers.
Right.
And I think he also said, quit asking questions and turn that question into a statement. What does he mean by that?
Almost all questions have within the question the answer. When I ask you a question and I'm able to turn the question around into a statement, the answer is already there. What is your attitude toward religion would be a question. The statement would be, you have an attitude toward religion.
Oh, yeah.
And there's already contained within the statement an answer to my question. Now, the specific may not be there. And patients ask a lot of what are technically called phony questions.
Yeah, because it sort of highlights their dependency upon you. It's a way of trying to flatter you, the therapist. It's a way of clinging to you, I suppose.
I hear your explanation.
Maybe I'm doing the same thing. Well, no. I'll have to get a little closer to this concept of Gestalt.
When?
Now. Here and now. There are a few points that I'd just like to go back to so that we can have a complete Gestalt. There were interesting points that we touched upon. One of them was the cause of anxiety being the different fantasies that we have catastrophic fantasies, and we also have anastrophic, and of course the word anastrophic really intrigued me because we all know catastrophic fantasies, we all have them, but anastrophic meaning very pleasurable anticipations. That was one point that I just wanted to bring up. And do you want to comment on that, Jim? Or?
Yeah, Fritz's, one of his little quotations was, no expectations, no disappointments, little expectations, little disappointments, big expectations, big disappointments. Expectations are what are involved in either catastrophic or anastrophic fantasies. A fantasy is a fantasy is a fantasy.
Yeah.
And over again, the point is made, what you're doing at this moment is having fantasies, whatever they are. And they can be of doom, they can be of pleasure, but the act is fantasizing. The act is thinking about, fantasizing about.
Was he pure in that sense? Didn't he fantasize a great deal?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I had that feeling about him,
yeah.
that he did, despite his strictures to the contrary.
Despite or because of or whatever, as I said before, Fritz, one of his blind spots was he had all kinds of catastrophic expectations, and there was always enough reality so that he could justify his move. And existentially, Fritz was a good analyst. He was never quite fully existentially oriented. There was an ideal for him which he didn't reach.
There was something else that he had said at this lecture that I attended some 4 years ago at S1. He said that the rhythm of human life is pulse. And then we touched upon, before you did, in fact, about contact and losing contact as if this were a rhythm, extension and withdrawal, expansion and contraction. And we can all sense that in respiration and exhalation. The very blood pressure is measured that way. I'm so intrigued by this book. There's In and Out of the Garbage Pail. I kind of like it better than all of his technical works, which form the foundation of his whole reputation. In and Out of the Garbage Pail. It's a crazy name, but this was characteristic of Fritz. You can see that there was a fusion between his intellectual achievements and the life of his spirit, his emotional feeling. He really assimilated so many of these ideas
yes,
that he believed in.
This is very characteristic of Fritz. Is very well read. He would, if something was intriguing to him, within the next day, this became part of Fritz. And at first, when I raised in the tradition of science and of footnotes and of giving credit to and so on, I experienced Fritz as a crook, that he was taking and not giving credit. Later, I became aware that Fritz truly assimilated enough so that what was coming out was no longer the other person's paragraphs or sentences. They were now Fritz's paragraphs or sentences. And in teaching Gestalt therapists, the science of Gestalt therapy is very similar. That is, a person who has watched a Gestalt therapist work can see what is the science, the art, the being yourself, the using the science and being yourself. And this is the beauty, to be able to assimilate a science and be an artist.
Yeah, like they say, the greatest art is artless, and I suppose that's what people have to do. They have to absorb the basic principles, but really absorb them so that when they're working, they're not aware that they're using rules and principles and basic tenets of a particular approach.
I gave you a copy of the notice that we Gestalt therapists received from Chicago.
Oh, yes.
When
Fritz
died.
Left his body.
Yeah. And what I found so characteristic was the statement by Fritz just before he died. He was full of all of the tubes and so on, and he'd just gone through a lot of surgery and was apparently beginning to recover from a long, extensive exploratory surgery. When he suddenly sat up in bed and the nurse rushed over to him and said, "Dr. Perls, you can't do this." And he sat and dangled his feet over the edge of the bed and looked at her and said, "Don't you tell me what to do," and died.
And died, yeah.
And that's a beautiful, beautiful way of dying for Fritz. That's the way Fritz lived. And that's the way Fritz died. Fritz was his own man. He would take from somebody else, incorporate, take in, and use in his own inimitable fashion. Sometimes the difference was so slight that at first glance, if I didn't know him, if you didn't know him, looked like an imitation. Fritz was not an imitator.
No, there was nobody like him, and he absorbed everything that was important to absorb. Just like in a certain sense, our lives are enriched by having had contact in varying degrees, of course, with him. And one thing I'd like to say about our talking together, that there's nothing funereal or nothing mournful about talking about Fritz, which is a great thing. As to use the cliche, this is the way he would have wanted it to be, but I think it's in the spirit of Fritz Perls that we talk about him in this particular manner.
I don't know if you're familiar with the subtitle of Gestalt therapy, and the subtitle is the Fritz's life and the way Fritz died, and I believe the future of Gestalt therapy is embedded in the whole idea of the principle of excitement and growth.
Yes.
And that an organism can only stay alive through exercising excitement, not subduing excitement. That growth means being excited, going with.
Jim, many years ago, maybe, well, at least when I was a boy, there was a magazine published called Vanity Fair, and they had a feature, it was an illustrated feature all the time, called Impossible Interviews. For example, an interview with the leading movie queen of that day and the Pope in Rome. I was thinking of an interview between Fritz Perls and Krishnamurti, and the reason that came to mind was that so much of their philosophy is very similar, namely the idea of, you die to what is past, that what is happening now is the only thing that's going on, really, the only show in town, as it were. What about that impossible interview, or would it be, is it really that impossible as I conceive it to be?
I don't know. I do remember, I don't know too much about Krishnamurti. I remember an actual interview that was done for, I think it was a movie or television, of the Maharishi and Fritz. And Fritz found him impossible, that little smiling idiot. And he was very uncomplimentary, and he had some very negative attitudes toward the Maharishi. Now, Fritz frequently had very strong negative attitudes toward other prima donnas, whatever their field might be. He was much more accepting or tolerant of somebody who was willing to play second fiddle. Now, if Krishnamurti is a prima donna, I don't know the man, I am imagining some rather impossible situations, or a lot of swords crossing and so on. I can't picture anything other than a fight. If, on the other hand, Krishnamurti is willing to take second billing, I think an interview is possible.
Well, just as you and I realize how important Fritz is as a person, an undying person, I'm certain that we are aware of the fact that his teachings will have great influence upon the future of American psychology and world psychology as well. I'd like to wind this up by reading something which strikes me as a passage of great warmth, advice that he gives to his friends. He says, "Friend, don't be a perfectionist. Perfectionism is a curse and a strain, for you tremble lest you miss the bull's eye. You are perfect if you let be. Friend, don't be afraid of mistakes. Mistakes are not sins. Mistakes are ways of doing something different, perhaps creatively new. Friend, don't be sorry for your mistakes. Be proud of them. You had the courage to give something of yourself. It takes years to be centered. It takes more years to understand and to be now. Until then, beware of both extremes, perfectionism as well as instant cure, instant joy, instant sensory awareness. Until then, beware of any helpers. Helpers are con men who promise something for nothing. They spoil you and keep you dependent and immature. It feels good to play preacher and enjoy a pompous, niche style." With those words, I'd like to conclude this program. This is Herschel Lyman, and the name of the program is Come to Life. With me has been Dr. James Simkin, who was co-leader with Dr. Perls for 6 years in Gestalt therapy training workshops for professional psychotherapists. Thank you very much.
This program was produced by KPFK, Pacifica Radio for Southern California,